St. Louis sits on the bank, and that region is curiously known as Little Egypt. These layers of story that you may or may not be aware of if you're going through these regions. One of the curious things about St. Louis is that the site for these mounds. The archaeologists call them mound builders, and they're basically flat-topped pyramids, earth mounds with flat tops, and
like ziggurats. Ziggurats,
sort of, but they just look like hills now, flat-topped hills. And it was some time before the European Anglo-American settlers, however we call ourselves, moving in there, recognized that they were something other than simply bumps. Right? Because they don't look, I mean, they look built if you pay attention to them, but they don't necessarily look like, they're not rock. They're earth mounds.
Okay.
But there's some of them are moderately tall, and they were centers of fairly significant settlements. And one of them was, they're called Cahokia now, right across the river from where St. Louis now sits. So you say this was already a settlement area. There's no writing to describe what happened in these mounds or these pyramids. So it's solely archaeological speculation. Some of the objects found in them look rather South American or Central American, but they could have come by trade. So it's, maybe trade down the Mississippi, through the Gulf, down to the Yucatan, the Caribbean, say the Mayan, who knows, right? I think that there's not, we don't have stories about what went on in those cultures, and they all left before any Europeans showed up. They weren't driven out by the Americans coming through, or the United States coming in. Those settlements were already abandoned. But
I'm putting all this together
for the. I have a mosaic that was.
I need my Hatshepsut fake beard on when I do.
You
these.
You do. Let me give them a different picture for you talking about it. Here she is. She's putting on her Hatshepsut.
It's very interesting because you've got this, you've obviously got a history of some kind of pyramid building civilization that for some reason just up and abandoned. Why would you just abandon everything? There's so many questions, but also the other thing that you've mentioned is that they left no writing about themselves, which means clearly somehow illiterate people are capable of resembling advanced architecture at some point. I don't know if it's very interesting.
Cleopatra's Pharaoh again. The interesting thing about the rivers, everything's flooding right now in the United States. Dallas had a terrible flood recently. There's floods. And then have we recreated the Nile? Is the Mississippi as the riverine Nile? Yeah. So
well, you do have a delta. You do have the Mississippi Delta, don't you?
We do, and we have have Memphis.
You've got Little Egypt.
We have Little Cairo.
Bizarrely Egyptian-sounding country. Your United States.
Wait! Didn't we have a monument in the last episode we were talking about? Look, there's this obelisk in our capital.
The big dick statue.
That is a monument to the president, the first president of our United States.
What a monument!
But
sorry, I can't help myself. It's hilarious. You guys are like, you're so innocent and lovely and pure, and yet the founder of your empire, the statue that's been erected for this guy is literally a giant phallic symbol.
Why do you keep saying that? It's just because it's tall and skinny?
No, it's very phallic.
Well, we know bears will know that Owen, I forget now where that picture was, right? Owen had a little demonstration of this in one of his social media pictures.
That's right.
But is there more to it than just that it's tall and skinny and sticks upright?
Yes.
There is. Oh, okay.
Yes. What we said last time, we were talking about the link between Egypt and empire in general, because Egypt is the blueprint for it. So we have this, the construction of the first empire in human history along the banks of the Nile. So it develops out of a trade system along this massive river that floods just like your river. And the mythology that develops around the flooding of the Nile and what that meant to the ancient Egyptians, because that was also a big part of the religious system there. They had to wait for the rain to fall in the highlands of the continent, which is what they called Lower Egypt, down towards Ethiopia. And so you'd get these big monsoon rains, and then all of a sudden the Nile would flood, and it would bubble up and bring up all of these nutrients and all of this beautiful soil from the bottom of the river, and kind of vomit it out all over the desert areas around the banks. And suddenly you've got irrigation, you've got the potential for agriculture in a country where you would not be able to grow anything if it wasn't for this flooding. So the rhythm of this flooding of the Nile then sort of sears itself into the Egyptian mind, and they develop a mythology around why it starts to flood, which is connected to the obelisk that was put up for Washington. Because in the story, in the Egyptian mythology, you've got the gods that are responsible for the flooding, and a little bit of, I don't know, should I tell like a little tiny portion of the tale, so that people know? Okay, so you've got the god Osiris and his wife. Everyone knows about Isis, because if you're paying attention in the last stream, you would have seen that Cleopatra was depicted as Isis in some of the hieroglyphic carvings on the walls. So Osiris is a great guy. He's got a hot wife, and he's got a brother Set who's a bit of an asshole. And Set invites him over to a party because Set wants to take over the kingdom, wants to kill his brother. So brings him over and says, okay, have some drinks, chill, enjoy yourself. The trick that Set has set up is this coffin, which has been magically created. It only fits his brother Osiris, and whoever lies down into the coffin will be, shut in and killed and entombed forever. So everyone's trying it out, Cinderella style, and eventually Osiris says, oh yeah, I'll get in the coffin, because he's drunk and not paying attention to the schemes of his brother. So he lies down in it, and of course Set then traps him inside it and kills him. So in the story, he gets chopped up into a bunch of little pieces, and parts of his body are thrown all over Egypt, sprinkled along the Nile region, every part of his body. So Osiris's wife, Isis, is obviously very upset. Her husband's being chopped up into little pieces, but she's quite cunning. So she decides she's going to use magical powers to go and find the pieces of Osiris's body and put them back together, and then get her husband back. She successfully gets every single piece except for one.
Oh, which one is missing?
The most important piece. She can't find it. Yeah, his dick is missing. So basically, she creates the first mummy out of her husband's body, but the phallus of Osiris is missing. So the Egyptians then start erecting these massive phallic symbols called obelisks all over the country, and it's connected to the mythology of Osiris and the fertility and the story of how he has to be avenged because of the castration, essentially, that his brother Set did against him. So this is like the original mythology of ancient civilization, and for some reason it's sort of appealed to everybody so much that the obelisk is present everywhere, all over Europe, and now in North America it is the symbol of your founding president.
Interesting. Yes,
it is. And why that is, why most Americans, or most Westerners that are not looking at the history of this kind of mythology, they'll visit North America, or you ask most North Americans, okay, so who founded your country? What kind of people founded your country? And I think most people would say, oh, we're a Christian country, we were founded by Christians. Why do you have an Egyptian obelisk as the monument to your president?
It's not just it's not just the monument to a president. So I kept promising to talk about the Masons. We passed a mosque. Oh no, wait, we passed something that looked like a mosque. There was a Shriner mosque. It's the and then you realize the other thing that you have in all of the architecture in the United States is Masonic temples. these are the men's clubs from the 1920s. This one was built in 1923. It's a mosque. They call it a Shriner mosque. There's Arabic on it. It's got, from the outside you can see beautiful stained glass and mosaic and things like that. It's quite striking building. There's a giant Scottish Rite temple in Santa Fe. I think here Santa Fe is in New Mexico is the cathedral city for the region. The Spanish have had a cathedral there for centuries, but there's a giant pink, it's very pink, it's very, very, very pink, Scottish Rite Masonic temple. There's we have,
I hate it already.
well, what was, Washington had was he Christian?
Can you be a Christian and a Freemason?
Well, we know he was a Freemason. This layering of mythology that we're talking about. There's the landscape, the naming of things. So we have Little Egypt and Louisiana. We need to get to why Napoleon sold it to the United States, which also has some of this. We have this Masonic overlay, the Egyptian Masonic overlay. I think the obelisk is there not necessarily because they're worrying about Isis and Osiris, but because of the way in which the sense of what it is to be civilized is carried. I think you're right there. And what this has to do with why there are Masonic shrines and temples all across the United States, particularly in the period in which, say, Route 66 was being. All of these roads are built on top of old roads, so there's a previous route that is then incorporated into the new ones when they're building the interstates. You keep wanting me to talk about the maritime, but I keep ending up back in the land. I wonder how that is happening.
Well, is it the land?
So the interesting thing that Napoleon does, among other things, after taking power after the French Revolution, is go conquer Egypt. Yeah. And one of the interesting artifacts of his trying to at least take over Egypt is we have copies of it at the University of Chicago in the special collections, this giant survey of Egypt, the description of Egypt. They're in big folio, like elephant folio books of drawings of the artifacts, the land, the daily life, all of this. It's part of the French tradition from the 18th century of the encyclopedias, just full descriptions of everything. But Napoleon sends his scientists and architects and such into Egypt to make an enormous record of the civilization there. Lord Admiral Nelson comes and defeats Napoleon at a big battle.
They'll just take territory and then swap it for another one. So he wants to play swapsies for the Nile. So he's going to give up.
Do happen in Napoleonic France. But it's like, which one came first? Because Nelson defeats and this is the British Empire gets its imperial power after that, right? That's why they have a big monument to Nelson in Trafalgar Square, because of that defeat of Napoleon at the Nile over Egypt. Then the British, they carry on defeating the French Navy, and the British, after those Napoleonic Wars, that's when they become the great maritime controller of everything, right? They'd been working on it over the centuries, obviously, with the Spanish and the Dutch and everything. But once they defeat the French in that battle, they are now the great maritime power in the world. So we're still, even every time, we keep ending up in this land story. They're controlling the rivers, and it goes back to the sea, and it's interesting that the land keeps flipping back and forth for us between the land and the sea. I mean, we were talking about dicks, right? The obelisk.